But at the times they did exist, there were totally different resolutions. So what I'm trying to demonstrate with the historical fact pattern here is you can't assume that because every resolution you've debated fits a particular convention, that that's what debate has always been. It is always changing. It's driven by the students. If you were the one that stood up and said, I want a topic next year that's different, you're going to have to go over a pretty hard hill to get there. But it's possible. This year, the college debate slate of topics is the most different that it's been in a very long time. That doesn't mean that the non-USFT passage was optional win, but it does mean that we're at a place now where it's on the ballot for the first time in forever, or the second time in forever. Topicality debates are very simply one question. What are acceptable points of stasis? That's all a T debate is. Topicality debates are nothing more than what are the acceptable points of stasis. The affirmative walks in and initiates a claim. The negative says, that's not fair, because you picked a point of stasis we're not prepared for. You picked a point of stasis we're not ready to debate. You picked a point of stasis that isn't balanced. You picked a point of stasis not in the resolution is nothing more synonymous than saying you picked a point of stasis that's bad for debate. Does everybody follow this? That's all a T debate is. Here's the trick. What we're about to transition to now is the assumption that I made sitting in your seats in 1997 when I was at this debate workshop. The assumption that I made that the resolution would always be literally defined and the point of stasis in debate is not the way debate is happening right now. Now, you can have a couple reactions to that. You can say, I am going to stand on that wall. You need me on that wall. I go for a framework 300 feet from people trying to kill me every day. I'm ready to do this. I'm going to fight the wall, and I'm going to win in every debate that I have, that this is how debate should be. It should be the same practice that it was, where the resolution is the point of stasis literally defined. If you want to do that, this lecture is going to show you a vocabulary necessary to defend that portion of the framework. If you don't want to do that, and you want to say, I don't see the resolution in the way people saw it 10 years ago, then hopefully today will give you vocabulary to articulate what type of way you're approaching the resolution. But in order to do that, today we're going to talk about a spectrum of interrogation. So what do teams do with the resolution? And this is a spectrum because it goes from one end to another. The end on the far left, if we were imagining it as a spectrum, is the closest to a literal interpretation. So the first approach is called a case study approach. You all have heard, some of you all have heard me give this debate before, but I want to give it again. Do you all know that the idea that you read a plan in a debate is relatively new in the history of debate? That there was an immense fight between two workshops, Georgetown and Northwestern, that took place in the middle of the 80s. And the leader of the Georgetown workshop was a professor named Unger, and the leader of the Northwestern workshop was a professor named Zarefsky. And Professor Zarefsky said, plans focusing an entire debate on one example of the resolution is dumb. We should be testing the entire resolution in every debate. So the affirmative should be able to read any affirmative that's an example of the resolution in as many of them as they want to try to defend. And the negative should be able to stand up and prove the resolution is bad, even if you happen to have picked one good example of it. If there's 10 bad examples of it, that doesn't mean your one good example means the resolution is good. And so he developed a theory called hypotesting, hypothesis testing, where the resolution was a stated hypothesis. The Georgetown can't push back and said, no, we want the case study approach. We want the affirmative to pick one example of the resolution that is a case study in the claim and defend it for the entire debate. And if at the end of the year we've had thousands of debates with people putting case studies out there to test the resolution, at the end of the year, as a community, we'll have a pretty good idea about whether or not the resolutions are good or bad. Do I follow that? The case study approach won. So what we generally do now is have you pick an example of a topical affirmative and learn to defend it as a case study. Not the way debate always was, but the way it is at this exact moment. Pretty simple. We do that. We're testing that. You know what that is. The B subpoint, resolutional play approach. This is when you engage the resolution without assuming the burden of affirming the question asked by it. So the resolution is phrased as a question. Should the United States federal government If you look at the resolution and said, I don't give a crap about the question of the resolution. I'm not trying on the affirmative for the end point of my 8 minutes of constructive speech to be that somebody says out loud, yes, the United States federal government should do that. Instead, I'm going to use the sentence of the resolution as an actual site to investigate a larger or broader concept. My burden in this debate is not to answer the question yes or no of the resolution. My burden in this debate is to use the resolution strategically to accomplish something bigger. So, an affirmative could say we advocate the topic as a site to evaluate the middle passage as America's first ocean development policy. I took that sentence from an actual affirmative and just took out the phrase immigration policy, which is what was read in college debate, and just put ocean policy, ocean development policy. Could easily be an app on this year's topic. The goal here, once again, is to use the resolution, to engage the resolution, but not to answer the question of the resolution that literally, yes, the United States federal government should do this or should do that. See, the controversy area approach. These are affirmatives that engage the controversy area without the burden of worrying about the USFG. So they may say that ocean development is good. They may say ocean exploration is good. They just don't want to have to defend that that is done by the United States federal government. Most of these affirmatives are very good at structuring the answers to the problem controversy area about individual personal action. So they'll say, we don't want to have a conversation that divorces the agency to fix a problem up to the federal government and see what they can do about it. We, as debaters, right here, can talk through what we're doing on our daily lives that's actually increasing or decreasing the pollution of the ocean. So rather than saying you want the United States federal government to have to be the ones that figure out the solution, we are the ones that are going to figure out the solution. And we're going to do it right here in this debate round, advocate for the things that could be done differently, or advocate for a certain particular type of inspection of analysis can be done differently. But the point is, they're ready to impact turn the United States federal government. If you stand up and read topicality or read framework and say, you pick a point of stasis that's not the USFG, they're going to say, you're correct. Our act is designed to impact turn whether or not that point of stasis is good or bad. Everybody follow that? Okay. Transitioning down a little further. Micro-political resistance. Moving down the spectrum. We started with case studies. Then we dealt with people who actually want to engage the whole resolution using it. Then we dealt with people who say, I don't want to do anything with the USFG part of it, just the controversy here. Now we're at the people who are going to say, no. We're engaging the debate community through the controversy area. Sometimes the teams that make these arguments don't actually have what you would call an advocacy statement. Instead, they have a roll of the ballot type of argument. So this would be an example of that. Vote for the team that does the best job of exploring the possibilities of accessibility in the debate space. Is that an ocean app? No. We advocate the end of the use of development as an affirmative obligation in the debate space, with an entire app about why the concept of development is harmful in the debate space. These micro-political resistance acts are on a full understanding with you when you walk in the debate room that they are not about to debate you with a literal interpretation of whether or not ocean policy is good or bad. Instead, they're mimicking the cross-sex I did with Matt. They're saying, before we worry about whether or not the resolution is good or bad, before we worry about whether the United States federal government should do something else, let's talk about what's taking place in this room, at this tournament, and on all the other tournaments taking place this weekend. So let's correct the debate space first. How we answer the question of the resolution, is it good or bad, will be something entirely different. So when you stand up and you're like, oh, wait a second, policy education is critical. Learning about the government's good, so then you can resist the government from doing bad things. Learning about topic research is good, because then we know something about the ocean and pollution. The reply is always the same. Good for whom? You are assuming a set of educational benefits for a very small group of people. And we're talking about how to get more people in the room so that when those benefits come out, it helps more people. So if you win all your offense, all the reasons why legal education is good, debating about the government is good, debating about the topic is good, then what you should be worried about is who gets to have the benefits of that. And if your answer to that question is me because I want it, That's a way less persuasive claim. Did I follow that? The response is always the same. You'll get plenty of topic debates and other debates. Go ahead. In your other debates, you can debate about ocean policy. In this debate, let's debate about the debate committee. Now, of course, that's always an assessment made in the moment. Who knows what percentage of the debates are actually about the topic anymore? Some people have lots of hyperbolic anecdotal experiences. They're like, we went to a tournament, never debated the topic once. Other people are like, well, the region or circuit we debated in, you couldn't read anything but the topic, else you'd lose on the spot. The point I'm getting at here is understanding that microphone resistance is different than engaging the topic is a key component to understanding how you're going to approach it. ESA point. The teams that just straight up reject the concept of a point of stasis. The teams that say a point of stasis arrived out of a particular set of scholarly arguments that all assume the possibility for civil society, that we could actually have a debate where if we decide on the point of stasis, both sides would have an equal chance of winning. Guess what? We don't believe that's possible. We believe that civil society is bad. We attempt to try to say it's possible is a bad thing, and that your imposition of the resolution on us is an example of targeted killing, which is an increasing phrase you'll hear trickle down from college debate because it became a bigger deal in college debate last year. That if I know precisely where you are, I can attack. And that the point of the resolution is to hold somebody in a particular spot so that you can attack. And that the point of these teams' arguments is often to say our survival depends on developing the skills necessary to resist those types of imperialist and objectionable policies. And then rather than learning the legal aspects of them, we want to use this debate space to be trained in the strategies of survival that have nothing to do with whether or not the United States federal government should do something in the ocean area or not. So the fact that you even read framework is an example of attempting to defend civil society, of attempting to defend deliberative democracy, of attempting to defend an understanding that we are critiquing from the outside. So, does everybody see the spectrum? We're going to do questions in a second. Does everybody see the spectrum then? We start on the far end with the people who are literal interpretations. I'm a case study approach. We worked our way into the people that use the whole resolution to accomplish something else. Then we move to people that are like, well, the controversy area is oceans. Let's talk about that. I just don't want to have to be the USFG. To people who said, before we talk about any of that crap, let's talk about the debate community. To people who said, to hell with all of it. We have something more important to talk about. We don't want to talk about your point of stasis. We don't want to be held accountable to your point of stasis. Does everybody see the spectrum of interrogation? Have all of you seen a team at some point on it? Know an example of each of the areas I'm talking about. Now, they're not firm lines, right? I can't defend that a team isn't a little bit of more than one. I'm just trying to, for the concepts that we're talking about here, trying to outline what I think is something that is actually relevant for the question at hand. So now with our spectrum of interrogation in mind, with our history of resolutions in mind, and with our point of stasis as a theory in mind, let's turn to what the heck you do with this. Now what? I think that the answer to that question depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If your goal is to defend a particular type of engagement with a resolution, so if your goal is to say, I want to be the farthest end of the spectrum that rejects the point of stasis altogether, then you have to understand that better and better neg teams are going to start counterplaning at different points on the spectrum. A lot of teams that say the point of stasis is bad, Judge, make all their offense to the case study approach. Make all their offense to the most literal interpretation of the resolution. And most of you that are framework debaters, for some reason, insist on only defending the most extreme case study approach. You're not thinking strategically that in fact it might be possible to move your neg arguments down the spectrum and say, actually, since you don't believe in any interpretation of stasis, you believe any attempt to have predictability before debate is bad, you think that any attempt to say that you have to do something is an obligation to reject, I'm going to defend the controversy area approach. My counter-interpretation is, you don't have to be the USFG, you just have to be the controversy area of oceans. You can defend how you interact with that however you want. You want to give an act that's about you reducing pollution? Go for it. But we should know, walking into every debate, we're going to debate about oceans as a point of stasis, and here's the advantages that come from centering a discussion on oceans. Did I follow that? Now, another team stands up and they're like, USFG bad. Fine, not us. Divorcing agency to the government bad. Fine, not us. Role-playing bad. Fine, not us. Did I see how that works? So everybody, no matter where you're at on the spectrum, has to understand the advantages and disadvantages to the type of interrogation you're doing at a particular moment. And if you understand those, it changes the strategy of how you approach the debate. For instance, if you debate a team that you know on the affirmative, has always said, reject the point of stasis, reject the point of stasis, reject the point of stasis. Why, when you are affirmative, are you reading something that is a predictable point of stasis? Why are you continuing to hold yourself to the obligation of defending a case study approach if you know when they have negatives affirmative, they say T is like the most evil thing ever? Are they really going to go for it all of a sudden on the negative? Maybe, maybe not. That's a dangerous gamble. It's one you should just have to figure out. Okay, the last thing, the reason why I think this is important to understand is that I think a lot of teams, and I'm guilty of this, I think a lot of teams are influenced by their coach's perspective on this spectrum. I think a lot of teams hear judges and coaches flippantly talk about arguments on the spectrum, and as a result of that get an impression that some part of it is either really good or really, really bad. And I think the truth of the matter is you all, as debaters, are influencing how the spectrum is debated, not us as coaches. We are not the ones that are doing it. So when somebody wins a major tournament or goes really deep in a major tournament without debating the strict case study approach, other kids look around and say, hey, that's pretty cool, I wouldn't mind giving that a try. If you are an honest-to-God believer that the case study approach is the way to go, you better win some debates. You better make sure that when other people look around and say, what type of debate should I be doing for the future of the debate activity, that you can win and that you can make a persuasive case in the process of doing so. Because otherwise, people are going to be incentivized to move to different places. You can think through the advantages you would get from being in different places on the spectrum, asymmetries and otherwise. Okay, let's do questions for a little bit and then we'll be done. Yeah, question. I had a question over here a long time ago. Cool, next.
What's an example of a college team that uses the resolutional play approach? Because that's the only one I've been.
So good. So there was a team from Cal State Fullerton that said, we want to use the topic to queer the understanding of, and then whatever policy it was, immigration policy, whatever the policy was. So what they said was that you could use the resolution, the statement of the resolution, to reveal the insecurities of the area that was the controversy area, right? So we want to talk about immigration policy, which was a college topic a couple years back. They said we're going to use the resolution as a site to queer the reading of how immigration policy has been arrived upon the country. And then they said, look at the resolution. The resolution focuses on having the United States federal government actually determine who can and cannot be in the country. And they did a read of the resolution and came to the conclusion that the resolution showed us something important about society and that the act of queering the resolution should be voted for. Does that make sense? So it's not saying we're not going to debate the resolution. It's not saying we only care about the controversy area. It's literally using the resolution in its entirety to accomplish something different.
In a world where a team goes for something like that, what do you have to go for framework must be USFG?
You tell me. What do you have to do? I'm not going to answer that. What do you have to do? What are they essentially doing? Are they getting rid of the point of stasis? Okay, they're shifting the point of stasis a little bit. They're still debating the resolution. And their first we meet on every framework argument was, what the hell are you talking about? We are debating the resolution. Exactly. It's not that they've changed the point of stasis away from the resolution, it's that they've changed the point of stasis away from their obligations to defend a side of it. Does that make sense? So you have to then be prepared to not say just framework, you have to be TUSFG, because they're going to look back and be like, yeah, we talked about the USFG, you didn't listen to that. You have to say that you have to defend the instrumental implementation of an affirmative enactment of a plan by the USFG. You can't just attack the resolution. Does everybody follow that? A little bit harder, though, to be honest with you, than simply saying you're not the USFG. Stop doing the work right across. Yeah.
What advantages can you get from, I guess, shifting one way on the spectrum or another? If a certain team is reading the reject the concept of the point of stasis, and you decide to read, say that they should advocate a controversy area instead, it seems to me that they can still, I guess, out-left you or say point of stasis is still bad to the controversy.
Yeah. So the question Swab was asking is, if a team saying point of stasis is bad, what advantage do you get from moving it further down the spectrum of interrogation? I think the only advantage you get is that you generally don't link to the worst types of offense, right? So the best offense against the case studies approach is an entire set of critical literature about why focusing a discussion on the United States federal government is bad. Now, I don't want you all to think for a moment that there's not a monstrous amount of evidence pushing back the other direction. In fact, I think I can say this, although I'm not 100% on this, the last framework debate won at the MDT this year was in the doubles when Wake Forest Richard Min beat Towson, who just won seeded nationals on framework in the doubles of the MDT, and they only pushed from the 1NC on you should be engaging with the state. They didn't go for fairness, predictability. They were just like, you're not engaging the state. That's a bad idea, and pushed back. So I don't want to make it sound like that's a one-sided debate. However, if you didn't have to engage in any of the questions at all about whether or not the USFG was good or bad, that might be a way to avoid some disads and at the same time garner some offense. Yeah. I'm sorry, we said Alex and you, so Alex and you.
Your second maxim was change debates based off what the students want.
Yep.
Like Facebook discussion notwithstanding, how can somebody be like, I guess, micropolitical resistance to somebody without kind of being like for change?
The question is, how do you change the debate community without necessarily like having to get together a whole movement for change? I think that the answer to that question is threefold. Number one, wins. I think the debate community pays close attention to who's winning and what they're winning on. Now, I want you to understand that this operates a little bit like a bell curve. That what happens is you try an argument out, you're going to lose. You're going to lose for a while. And part of the reason you're going to lose for a while is not only because you haven't refined your argument yet, hasn't been tested by a bunch of ideas, but also because people just aren't familiar with it. They just don't understand it. They just don't get it, and the judges aren't persuaded by it. Then, you've had 100 debates saying the same thing. By debate 101, you're going to start picking people off, at least the people of equal skill set. Then you're going to start winning and beating people in some set debates, some people that you're a little bit better than, and then you're going to get a group of judges that know your argument, think your argument is good. You're going to have a little bit more predictability for mutual prep, which is what Greenside's going to teach you about in a moment, and then all of a sudden you're going to hit the peak and just go on a run, right? This happens. Debate arguments then climb to the top of the community. Here's the trick. They don't stay there very long once the entire community decides, fine, I'm not going to just read framework against you, I'm just going to beat you on the premise of your argument. Once the debate community decides, like, okay, fine, this is one enough debates to be worthy of my inspection, then all of a sudden everybody turns their analytic resources on your argument, and the question becomes then, how deep are you into fighting the lit? So that's number one. Strategy one is just win, with the full understanding that once you get to the top, it's not easy to stay there. Oftentimes it goes back down. That doesn't mean it doesn't change, but it does change. Number two is you can be a passionate advocate for something that needs to change in the debate community outside of the debates. And I don't necessarily think that has to only be framework. It can be places like this. I want to make sure I'm clear about this. When I say that you all change the debate community, it doesn't always happen while you're students, right? So all of you in this room should be judges. And if all of you in this room were inspired by something someone said to you at a workshop about a theory argument, right? Like somebody just absolutely convinced you that conditionality with two options was okay, but three was bad. And you just knew that till, you were blue in the face. When you are a judge, that's going to influence your perspective as a judge. The same thing is true here about other potential things you can change in the debate community. If somebody convinced you that the way debate is occurring now has a disproportionately negative impact on women's participation in debates, and you had an honest-to-God discussion with somebody about that to convince you that there was one or two things that could be different in the debate community to change that. It may not be a fight you can win right now as a student, but I guarantee you if you become a coach, and you host your own tournament, or you become a judge, and you start influencing things for your judge philosophy or the conversation you have with kids after debate. So that's the long-term strategy, is that it happens because you all grow them. Here's, for me, the day I will leave debates, I think I can say this out loud, the day I will leave debate is whenever I can't stomach the change the students want. The day I sit down and write a judge philosophy that's like, if you make this argument, I will never vote on it. I think besides what I think are basically going to the core that make sure the debate space is safe for everybody to be in, besides things that threaten the debate space. If someone just has an argument that I'm just like, I just think this is so dumb I would never vote on it. That to me is a red flag. Jarrod, it's time to move on. Because I think the students drive the activity in that direction. It's not a university share position, I don't want to make it sound like it is. But for me, the litmus test will be one day when somebody makes an argument, I'm just like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, I would never vote on that. That's a sign it's time to start looking at something else. Because I think the history of debate suggests that that change is inevitable. Inevitably, there is no such thing as the good old days in debate. It's always been tumultuous. And what we think are the good old days of debate, we just don't remember what the fights were about back then. The fights were about different things back then. They were just as ferocious. Now they've added a level of personal identity to it, which I think is actually probably good, because people are having to defend things and think about things they hadn't before. But the point of getting at is, I think that's a key sign. You all will change it. The third way that you can change the debate community besides winning and what you actually say outside of the debate space is to actually become in a position to study the thing that you're interested in changing, in a position that you can do something about it that affects not only the debate space but all of society. There's a little bit of hubris in the fact that we think we can change the debate space. It may just be that the debate space is changing because society is changing. It may just be we're having conversations about race because society is having conversations about race. It may be that we're having conversations about accessibility because society is having conversations about accessibility. The debate space isn't some immune, really cool space of all smart people. It may be that these are conversations that are happening around us. So being in the fight, in the bigger fight, at the larger society level, may be a way to also change the debate space. Make sense? All right, what else do we got? I think Izzy was next.
So on this question about like moving farther down the spectrum, I understand how that gives you the ability to like know like a lot of their offense, but it also seems like you lose a lot of your best offense.
It depends on what your offense is. Yeah, I could see an offense. I think that the teams that have been the most effective have been the people that have centered on why talking about this topic is a good idea. Okay, so I think that if you were able to stand up and say, archive interpretations, controversy area, oceans discussion, students, like imagine all those good women cards, students discussing the ocean, students getting interested in STEM research into the ocean, students having a conversation about their effect on the ocean, given the fact that it sustains life for the entire globe, and given the fact that the Western privileged position of how we treat the ocean, when there are millions of people in lesser developed areas, although that phrase has problems, that are totally dependent on the ocean, is an important conversation that we should be having. And to say, no, let's not have that conversation because I want to talk about the debate community, is selfish and misses a chance to talk about something that's more important. You follow what I did there? None of that comes with the baggage of defending USFG or role-playing USFG. So it depends on what your offense is. I'm happy to be up front. It's not easy to move down the spectrum, right? So I'm not saying it's always a good idea. I just think that you should at least have thought through whether or not your offense needs it or not. Next. Yes?
Would a negative state action fall under resolutional play if you don't force it to affirm the government does something?
If it's a negative state action you're defending as a case study, then it's just a case study approach. Like a lot of really good acts are the USFG should stop doing something, right? That's assuming it's still topical. That's a good old-fashioned case study approach that just happens to solve a bunch of teams' offense. Now you could, on the affirmative, basically defend resolution bad, right? Which is one of the examples I gave. You could just say like the resolution talks about development. All development done by the United States federal government is bad. Our AF is development bad. Right? If you did that, that's not really the case study approach at all. That's more or less a controversy area approach. Yeah, come on.
What do you define as engaging the resolution?
Probably the minimum threshold would be if somebody reads a we meet. Right? If you debate them on framework and they say we meet and then say something as it relates to how they're connected to the resolution, that would probably be the minimum threshold. So if you debate a team that doesn't even bother to say that they're anywhere close to the resolution, that's probably a vacuum test, litmus test, bright line, however you want to say it, that they're the far end of the spectrum and states is bad.
Well, do you think that engaging the resolution is different than talking about it? What do you think was the difference?
I think I'm using those synonymously. Yeah, I didn't really theorize the part of the lecture on what engagement is. She had a hand up in the room.
Out of curiosity, where do you consider yourself on the spectrum of interrogation?
I don't have an answer to that. As a judge, my sort of philosophy, I even changed my judge philosophy this year. I changed my judge philosophy to remove all of my argumentative preferences. Now my judge philosophy is an explanation of how I arrive at a decision. So I think that's what I think will be the next move in how judge philosophies work. Because it's so weird to have a judge philosophy that says something, in my mind, it's so weird to have a judge philosophy that says something if you're not actually willing to stand up and vote based on what the judge philosophy said, regardless of what happened in the debate. And I think most people don't do that. I think most people have a set of preferences in their judge philosophy, like I like debates that are like this, but that's not terribly helpful I think people are actually pretty bad at describing what they actually like and don't like about debate. So for me,